I only have a little bit to say, and mostly I'll tell you that the way the exhibit came about was I'm on the exhibition committee, and when the first slide, we had a proposal from Edwina, and the first slide or visual came across the screen. It was one of the resist pieces that you'll see. I had never heard of the process, I had never seen it, so I was intrigued. And I didn't even wait for the second visual. I raised my hand and said I'd take that one. And nobody, fortunately, nobody else asked for it. And so then about a month later, I met Edwina, and we have been working on this for 3 years or thereabouts, with several visits to her home where the artwork has been stored. We started going through the resists, I believe, and then from that point on, we looked through a different body of work at a little bit at a time, and then at some point, Edwina's house was filled with choices for this show. And there are many, many pieces that didn't come to Provincetown, and many pieces that didn't get into the show only because of the lack of space. My job is to create. Oh, okay. So my job is to create an installation to make the show the best, give it the best presence that I can imagine. And so that's what you're seeing when you walk through the gallery. But the few things that I do want to do is thank some people, because this show would never have been able to be up if it weren't for the staff. With the exhibition committee, I'll thank first, with Brian is the chairperson, Brian Dunnigan. And then I want to thank Chris for the opportunity to curate this show. The staff is amazing, and especially Madeline Larson, Melissa Moses, who you just met, Amy Davies, who's the tech person, Jim Zimmerman, who does a lot here, but he's here longer than I am, so, and we're about the same age, I think. But anyway, Jim hung the show mostly, and Donnie Beal, who's also an artist and a volunteer on the exhibition committee, also hung the show with me. So I thank all of those people. And of course, I want to thank Jean Wilcox, who did the beautiful catalog. There are note cards out there that are beautiful. And the Levin family, who you already heard about, but they're in the audience right now. It's Tony Levin and Rebecca, who are my friends and sponsors of tonight. So what else do I have to tell you? Not much, because I think the slides will tell you enough about Edwin, and then you'll find out more as we walk through, and I may have some things to say as we walk through, but at this point, I think we should just go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, well, I have a few thanks to offer before we get started as well. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Levin family for the opportunity to do such a lecture. It's quite an honor. And Chris McCarthy, CEO, and of Pam and her amazing staff, in particular Melissa Moses, Annie Langley, Grace Ryder O'Malley Prada, and Madeline Larson. You've heard some of these names. I'd also like to thank Jean Wilcox for doing the catalog. It's absolutely fabulous, and you should see it. A special thanks goes to Berta Walker, who was really the catalyst behind this show. We had some early discussions about my dad's work, but she lit the spark to get me going to submit a proposal. So special thanks to Berta. Of course, I should thank my family, my daughter Olivia for letting me alter her poem that some of you were seeing as it went by when we were coming in. It was actually written about me, but I thought it so well described my dad that she let me change it. Of course, one should thank one's parents, and I do. My dad was quiet, kind, loyal, and very supportive, especially to anyone interested in making art. To many of my cousins and my cousins' kids, he was known as Uncle Ed, and he always wanted to have them get involved in the art. He started teaching the school year 28-29, and his first summer vacation, he went to the Berkshire Summer School of Art in Monterey, Massachusetts, which is in the western part of the state. The following year was the second year of teaching, and that began Provincetown in the summer of 1930. So he was 23 at that point, and he came to Provincetown, and he was completely smitten with Provincetown, the environment for doing art, and the beauty of the surroundings. And in many ways, he never left. He did a lot of exploration of Provincetown on foot, especially in the early days, because he didn't have a car here. So he walked the moors, walked out to the beaches, explored around Shank Painter Pond, the dunes in back of Bradford. He really got to know the town by just poking around. So during the 30s, he would come here every summer, and his friends from art school would come, and they'd come and spend their vacations. My dad was lucky. He was a teacher, so he had the summer off. But his other friends, some of them had more normal jobs, I suppose, and only a couple weeks of vacation, and they would come here to paint. Family would also come to visit. And I just want to point out a few things. He's playing tag on the beach with Bert Gibbs and the Snows, and he was renting a room at the Gibbs, and eventually he rented a room with the Snows on Point Street. So he became friends with all of these people, and they obviously had a good time at the beach. Those are his arts buddies, and we have, I'm going to mention their name, Harold Fasting, Frank Levanko, my dad, and Jim Kevlin. My dad loved to go out and paint outside, and on the left, he's working at an easel in the bluffs above Newcomb Hollow Beach. He's doing a handstand after painting on Cornhill, and I guess it must have been a happy excursion because you don't do handstands for nothing. And again, with friends in the West End. There were 2 summers that he did not spend in Provincetown in the 30s. In 1933, he went to Europe, particularly Paris, and in our typical style, or his typical style, he left the afternoon school closed and returned the day before school opened. And he mostly was in Paris for all of July, and then went further south to Strasbourg, and then across the Rhine into the Rhine-Pfalz area of Germany, because there had been some ancestral roots there, and he went as far south as the Alps. He loved to sketch surroundings, but he also loved to sketch people, and so his sketchbooks are full of little impressions of people, a Strasburger drinking his tea, for instance. Some of them ended up on Christmas cards later. His second summer away from Provincetown in the 30s, in 1939, he took a trip to Mexico, and he traveled all around by train and the local buses. That means local buses with people going to market with their chickens and goats and whatever. He really just got around that way. He did a lot of plein air painting, a lot of watercolors. Sometimes these would become the subject of something larger when he got back home. He also was doing black and white photography at that point, and so that's a picture of some dwellings near Oaxaca. Oaxaca was as far south as he got on that particular trip. So in the 40s, up until 1941, he was back in Provincetown. So again, he's with friends. That's on Commercial Street. If you might recognize it, it's in front of what used to be the Blue Shutters. And you'll notice his hair is getting more free with Provincetown summers. And he liked to go out on boats if he could. And he made several trips out with the Grand Bank schooner named Constance. And a photographer who also summered in Provincetown, Jose Alemany, took that shot of him painting while he's seated on the deck, and he called it the Marine Painter. Again, there were lots of friends and family. My grandmother, Edwin Ertel Rissland, came to visit, and with my Aunt Lil and the Gregorys. So there was lots of happy times in the 30s, lots of painting, lots of visiting. Things changed once the war broke out, and 41 was the last summer he was here. In 1942-43, he, along with many other school teachers in the public school system, volunteered to become civilian instructors for the Army. And so he went down to one field, Chanute Field, and learned about air mechanics and the ins and outs of it. And a couple months later, he was sent to another field to teach it. So it's see one, do one, teach one, I guess. He returned home after the leave of absence. Actually, I should back up. He married my mother on a long weekend leave in June of 1943. They went back to post. He returned in September of the 43-44 academic year, thinking he would be starting to teach, but before September had ended, he was drafted. And after basic training, he was sent out to Lowry Field in Denver, where once again, he was teaching airplane mechanics to young flyers. And his specialty was the rear turret gun. And one of his assignments was to help paint a mural in one of the administration buildings. And you'll notice there are a lot of rear turret guns up there. And he's working on the mural up on a scaffold to paint it. Unfortunately, after the war, they took down the building and along with it, the mural. But in 1946, finally back home, he brought my mother, Faye, to Provincetown for the first time. And she too fell in love with Provincetown. And so Provincetown became our summer destination. That, by the way, if you want to place it, is in the West End, where the West End parking lot is. Those piles, which used to be the remains of a wharf, used to be there forever. They're gone now. Okay, then came me, and I sort of upset the summer plans for a little while. I made my first trip to Provincetown about a week after my 3rd birthday. And I, too, fell in love with Provincetown. I used to joke that once you got salt water in your veins, you could never get away from the ocean. And it was true. Even on the little boats at amusement parks, I wanted to be at the helm of the boat. And as I grew older and I got to the age where I could join the West End Racing Club, I spent every waking hour at the club. I learned how to sail there, I learned how to race there, and eventually, one of the years, I won what was the class called the Senior Weasels. Weasels were a very fat, unsinkable, untippable gaff rig boat that we all learned to sail on, and I was the senior weasel winner that year. There I am with Bruce Campbell. And this is Dorothea Santos, who was the runner-up. She's the daughter of Flyer Santos. And my good friend Mike Dahill was the winner of the Junior Weasels class. And his brother, and Mike Everett, was the runner-up. And in fact, Mike Everett's older brother, Timothy Everett, who's in the audience, also sailed at the West End Racing Club. So we were quite a very tight bunch. I and Mike Dahill used to regularly crew for Larry Richmond. And many of you know about Larry Lawrence Richmond. He was very, very generous in what he gave to the town. He was really the godfather of the West End Racing Club and did a lot to put it on good financial foundations. He also was very generous in what he gave to the Provincetown Art Association and Museum. Not only monetary things, but also a very nice collection. I continued at the Western Racing Club, but no longer as a sailor. I was now an instructor, so I spent 2 years teaching in the summertime. It was the best summer job I ever had, teaching kids how to sail. After the war, my father was discharged in the fall of 1945, and in 1946, he began taking courses at Columbia. We lived in New Jersey, and even in the 30s, my father had been doing a lot of coursework, very often evening classes at local universities like NYU or Rutgers. But in 46, he registered under the GI Bill at Teachers College, Columbia. And basically, for the next 10 years, in other words, as long as the GI Bill lasted, he went over to do studio work and degree work over at Columbia. And some of his, I guess, principal teachers, Federico Castellan, who was an oil painter but also did lithography and other print techniques, watercolor with Edwin Ziegfeld, who's well known, I think, in the New York area for his watercolors. He did lithography and silkscreen with Arthur Young. My father in 1935 and 37 had first done lithography with Jack John W. Gregory here in town, and my father did a couple lithos on using Jack's stones and prints. At Columbia, they weren't using stone, they were using zinc plates. And finally, a lot of woodblock work with Hans Müller. So just a sampling, we have the New York subway station, a New York subway station, as an oil. We have St. John the Divine as a watercolor. We have a sort of a candid sketch on the DL&W, which stands for Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, but DL&W, to many of us who took the train, call it the delay, linger, and wait. And with the DL&W, you got to Hoboken, and from Hoboken, you could take the ferry across to Lower Manhattan. So that was done with lithocrayon. And the last one is a lithograph, but this is of something he had sketched while in Mexico. So my dad did that a lot, that if he had had sketches or done another, say a watercolor, he would come back and use that as a basis for a new painting. In this case, he used it for the basis of a litho. While with Castellan, he did a lot of oils, and he did a big series, big for him, not by today's standards, 24 by 30 inch, a series of New York City. In that period with Castellan, he also did a big oil that is in the front room called Hurricane. Castellan also is noteworthy, not because of just the oil studio, but he is the one who introduced my father to the resist technique. And these are two examples. Along the shore on the left is looking up at the Methodist, AKA the Chrysler, AKA the town library. That's in the exhibit. Little Natalie, there's another Little Natalie. It's a twin resist to this. And we can talk about the resist technique a little bit when we go and walk around that. But Castellan felt that with my father's background in making prints, doing photography, that he would enjoy this process where you have to actually paint in reverse. He also pointed out that it would have the side effect, the benefit, of being easier to carry on the ferries and the railroads that he took back and forth to go to New Jersey. Carrying wet canvases on public transportation is kind of dicey sometimes. So we can thank Castellan for introducing my dad to the resist. Okay. He did a lot of oils throughout his life. He started oils before he came to Provincetown, but that 1930 oil of Long Nook is the earliest oil that he did in Provincetown. Many years later, 46 years later, he did lots of oils in between, but that is a paradigmatic scene looking out from the West End parking lot, which we used to call the Flake Yard. It's actually on the Dayhill's deck next door. He loves squalls, and from the deck you could see weather, all kinds of weather, and just experience it. And he liked to paint squalls. There is a squall painting in the exhibit. This is a different squall painting. And my father was always experimenting. And in the 1995 to 1996, he's approaching 90, he's still experimenting. And yes, he could paint scenes that you would recognize in a more traditional landscape mode, but he also started painting some things that are very loose, very ethereal, very atmospheric. He was always game for trying some new things, and I think it's quite laudable that someone, you know, in their 90s will try something totally different. One of the things he always did and enjoyed was life figure drawing. From his days as an art student, where you have to do this, he always enjoyed doing figures in the studio setting. And the one on, he continued, after he graduated from art school in 1931, and he continued taking studios with John Grabach, who was a well-known New Jersey painter, for about 5 years. And Grabach ran a life figure drawing studio. And so the one on the upper left-hand side was from a series of nudes that ended up in a publication about life figure drawing. The next one over is of a model in the studio dressed up in a suit. And then he got back to it again in the 70s. After my mother died in 1971, he wasn't coming to Provincetown right then, and he started painting at home and going to local studios around the house. And one of them was in East Orange, which ran several life drawing or life figure classes each week. And so the Conti crayon is from that era. And it's also at the East Orange Center where my dad met Ruth, his second wife, after my mother had died. And he loved doing oils of the models. I mean, you could do whatever you wanted in these studios, and sometimes he would do pastels, and sometimes he would do oils, because you would have maybe a 2-session opportunity with the model. And I think he had a sense of humor. The one on the lower right-hand, he didn't like smoking, but that was the smoker, and we had a secret nickname for it, the floozy. And just to recap, so he got his teaching certificate, and at the same time he was working on that, he was going to art school. And I want to say that the art school, the Newark School of Fine and Industrial Arts, was part of the Newark public school system. It was free. It was a 4-year standard art school, but it didn't cost anything. And it had programs in all kinds of disciplines. My father did general arts. It turned out my mother also went through the program in interior decoration. Ruth, his second wife, also went there doing a different specialty. And they used to run a Saturday morning program for kids in grades, I guess, about 4 through high school. And I went there on Saturday mornings. So the whole family got art education there. And as I mentioned, he did summer studies first in the Berkshires and then at Teachers College, and also here. So the first summer, as I mentioned, was with George Elmer Browne. Second summer, which was John Fraser of RISD. The third summer, he did sculpture with a sculptor from New York City named Julian Bowes. And he also learned lithography from Jack Gregory. He got his master's, he kept taking the studios. He was piling up course credits, but he had no interest in getting another degree. He just wanted to keep doing work. But throughout it all, it's always Provincetown. Provincetown is the anchor of a career of painting. And with my stepmother, Ruth, he started coming back here in about 1974. Her favorite destination had been Maine. He went to Maine once or twice, and then it was just Provincetown. He converted her. And they stayed at the Day Hills, which then had a small apartment with a deck, and you were right on the harbor, and you could just watch the boats, the scenery, the flats, the weather, and it was perfect. I just want to point out, in the picture of him at the Blessing of the Fleet, you'll notice he has a black sketchbook. He always walked around with a sketchbook. He was almost never without his sketchbook. He loved to draw, He loved to sketch. Sometimes he did the sketches in pen and ink. Sometimes they were little watercolors, little gems. But I think one thing to take away from this is the importance of drawing and being ready to make a note, as he liked to say, whenever you saw something interesting. And he had his favorite prowls around the boatyards, the old cold storage piers, the beach. So that's about it for the slide portion of it, but I would like to point out a couple things. In the gift shop at PAM, they do have copies of the catalog, and it really is a splendid catalog. At Berta Walker's gallery, just around the corner on Bradford Street, there is another complimentary show of my dad's work, and there you will find oils, resists, and watercolors as well. In the recent edition of Provincetown Arts, a magazine that comes out once a year, the summer edition has just come out. There's a nice feature story about my dad called The Long View. And I want to just end with saying that we have established a fellowship to honor him, the Edwin E. Rissland Fellowship for Young American Painters. And I'm sure more details about it will be on the PAM website next academic year, because I think we'll start taking applications then. But you can contribute to it if you wish, but it's a fellowship for young American painters to come to P-Town, to learn about P-Town, and just to paint. We especially appreciate if you're a school teacher or you work in some other field and you don't have time to paint, getting a week or two to paint is really heaven, and that's what we're trying to do. So that's all I have to say on the slide presentation, and I guess at this point we should turn up the lights and start heading to the gallery.